want to jot things down, feel free to. I don't think we have anything else to tell you, but here's Evan Morales through the Multicultural Center. So, Evan, it's all you.
Cool. Hi, everybody. My name is Evan Morales. Like Skylar said, I'm with the Multicultural Center through a branch of it called Mosaic. We do presentations and workshops about social justice and different um, social equity topics as well. I am also a musical theater major here at Ball State, so I see some familiar faces from the department. Some of you are completely new to me, which is awesome. Hold on, Daniel is joining. Fun fact, Daniel is my roommate. Uh, so yeah, today we're going to be talking about social justice, specifically in theater education. I will share my screen so we can get rolling on that. Oh wait, no, not that. Cool. Everyone can see? Cool. So yeah, let's get rolling with this. Hello? There we are. Um, so really quick to preface everything, just some rules for discussion. We want to be, as I'm sure you guys all are, but we want to be respectful of others when both listening and speaking. Be mindful of others' ideas. Try not to. This is not a closed-minded topic for sure, and this is something that we should all keep our ears open to and open to new ideas. Don't share unless you are truly comfortable with sharing. I know I wouldn't want anyone to feel uncomfortable or unsafe. So only speak if you truly feel like you're in a position where, or in a place where you can speak and don't feel uncomfortable or don't feel unsafe. And really quick, just about the BSU Multicultural Center, we support and advances the university's commitment to cultural diversity by serving as a resource for the recruitment, retention, and enrichment of students of color, promoting multicultural understanding through opportunities for cross-cultural connections, and providing programs and services to address the co-curricular needs of all students. One second, one more person's coming. And celebrating the historical contributions of diverse groups. Um, so that's a little bit about us. Also, really quick, while I am presenting, I want this to be very, discussion based. I don't want this to be me talking at you guys because that's not what we're all about. We want to create an environment where it feels like everyone has a say in this workshop. So we'll have set points for when we have, discussion questions and times where we can all chat. But if you have something to say or a question to ask while I am presenting, feel free to do the hand raising emoji thing or whatever it's on there to grasp my attention. I'll try to monitor the chat, but I'll do my best. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. We're gonna do, this is a little roadmap for right now. So first we're gonna talk about diverse casting and what that all entails, and then we're gonna move to a discussion about that. Then we're gonna move to equity in theater education, and we'll do a final discussion after that. Be pretty simple, and most of the time will be filled with discussion. At least I hope. I don't want this to be a very this and this presentation. We're gonna chat for sure. So first things first, let's talk about diverse casting. This is a topic that actually holds near and dear to my heart. I always try to pay attention to, diverse casting in theater, especially nowadays, and you guys definitely should too. So really quickly, according to Delaware Shakespeare, color blind casting or non-traditional casting is the practice of casting without considering the actor's ethnicity, skin color, body shape, or sex, and or gender. And color conscious casting then is the opposite of colorblind casting, taking into consideration the actor's skin color, body shape, and other characteristics. So I have two images up here. One of them is Hamilton, and this has been a pretty famous musical, if you will. I'm sure you all have heard, and it utilizes the technique of color blind casting, non-traditional casting. Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson, all these characters were they were old white men pretty much, and what we see here is, we have Lin-Manuel Miranda, or in this case, Javier Munoz as Alexander Hamilton, along with some other BIPOC actors playing people who historically were white. And on the right, we have a photo of the musical Hairspray. And this would be an example of color conscious casting because we're taking into consideration people's skin color, we're taking into consideration people's body shape, other characteristics such as that. You wouldn't want to hold a production of Hairspray where the people who should be played by BIPOC actors are played um, by white actors. That would just be offensive and appropriating. Also, if you guys don't know what BIPOC means, it is Black, Indigenous people of color. It's just a short acronym. So, anyone have any questions about that? We're gonna move to some discussion soon, really quick. Cool, cool. So yeah, really quick, the question that has been asked time and time again, especially in recent years, is colorblind or color conscious casting better? And the answer is both. Theater is very specific. I'm sure, as most of you have heard from aesthetics and other classes, theater is very specific, and it is important to understand the art that you are creating. It's important to, know the insides and out of each character, of the circumstances, of every given circumstance that you can get a hold of, so that way you understand what would be a better option for your show specifically, or whatever piece of theater that you are creating. So for example, you should be color conscious when putting on a show about a Latinx community, and you should be colorblind when putting on a show about pirates. It's simple, but it's also a very complex idea. So be sure to just know what the piece of theater that you're putting on inside and out before casting it, before making any judgments right off the bat, because you want to be as inclusive as possible, and you want to be as true to the world also as possible. You want to find a quick balance between that. So, moving on to some discussion questions. What are some, these are just some questions that I'm going to impose really quickly, but what are some specific examples of when it is okay and not okay to use colorblind casting and color conscious casting? Are there any experience you have had with either? And how can teachers implement these ways of casting correctly in schools, where you guys are going to be doing? So does anyone have any input on these questions? Oh, yep. I see a couple people. Oh, oops. One second. Go back. Ah, Skylar, I think you're muted.
Yeah, I see Montana. I don't know if you could see them. Montana's raising her physical hand.
So first off, you should know your students. So if you don't have the cast for, say, Hairspray, just don't do Hairspray. Ta-da!
Yeah, exactly. You should definitely know your demographic before putting on a show. I know personally, I came from a school that was predominantly white, so it wouldn't have been a good idea to put on Hairspray or Ragtime or shows that involve a lot of people of color, or a lot of people that, that's not our story to tell. Yeah, I see a hand raised. I can't see the names for some reason, so person with the green background.
I I feel like you should never use color conscious casting to try to promote any negative stereotypes about any given sort of people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it shouldn't be a case where you are enforcing a stereotype, or you're trying to poke fun or anything of that nature, really. It should be in a way that's more so tasteful and uplifting. There's a difference between appropriating and appreciating, where appropriating is kind of, dogging at the stereotypes and the judgments that, we all have built throughout the years, and that we all have, are a product of, based off, what we have learned and everything. Whereas appreciating goes the other direction and kind of uplifts those people and gives those people a voice in the story that they're telling, for sure. Grace and Matthew. All right, I can see the names now. That's cool.
Yeah, I was going to talk on an experience that I had with this, where I think I'm going to talk on colorblind, whereas like Mike was talking about color conscious. We had a situation where we were doing a production of Sister Act, and we had it as colorblind casting. And the issue with colorblind casting in that sense is that it could be taking BIPOC roles away from BIPOC individuals to give it to white people. And that was the issue that we were having, is that it was a white led cast, and that was a discussion that we had to have, where it was like, is this appropriate to be doing this as colorblind when it should be a color conscious situation?
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Like more often than not, when these roles are written, especially for characters who are BIPOC, it's written that way for a reason. It's written because those characters have a story to tell, and it's specific to who their identity, what their identity is. So if it is, written as a black character, you would want a black person to share that story, because that's no one else's story to tell other than a person who is black. Um, so yeah, that's a definitely really interesting experience. I'll share a little bit about an experience I've had as well, because this is something that it has been in recent developments. It's not anything that's like been in practice uh recently. We're just learning about this, and it's unfortunate, but at least we're starting to learn a little bit more, and we need to continue learning. So one experience I had was, and I'll admit a little bit of my faults in this as well. We were in a production of Thoroughly Modern Millie at my high school, and I'm not sure if you know the musical at all, but there are two characters who are Chinese, Ching Ho and Bun Fu. And I am a person of the Latinx community, and because I was a minority in that setting, they had cast me as one of those characters, and I did do the role and everything, and I played a Chinese person. And looking back on it, I can now say that I realized that that's not my story to tell, and it definitely should have been a little bit. The director at the time should have been much more aware of the demographic and who was auditioning, because we did have people of Asian descent who were in the show and didn't get that part. It was not my story to tell, and it was again more appropriating than appreciating, and that's something we all need to be aware of, because this isn't something that we've had a problem with like just recently. It's been happening time and time again, and we are just now understanding it. So it's important to definitely learn a little bit more. Same thing happened at your school. Yeah, that show, it's a toughie, especially for high school. And that's another thing you should really, like someone else had mentioned, I forget, but you should really understand the show that you're doing and the demographic that you have. It's not up to your discretion, even if you don't have um the demographic. It's not up to you to say, I want to do the show anyway. You really, really have to have a thorough understanding of the people and the students you have. Um, Try to put on 30 million, and administration said nope. Yep. Yeah, that's a toughie. All right, moving on. But why? This is going to be. Oh, we have another hand raised. Kaylee, go ahead.
I was gonna add on to the Thoroughly Modern Millie thing. My friend Haley, she was in a production in high school, and everyone thought like, "Oh, you're gonna get Mrs. Mears because you're Vietnamese," and everyone like assumed she was gonna get that role. And Mrs. Mears is actually played by if I remember right, it's like she's pretending to be Asian. Correct me if I'm wrong. And she ended up getting Dorothy. So like it was nice to see, someone who might not typically be cast as Dorothy, playing like a lead role. And in a similar sense, like it's nice to see people who aren't typically cast in lead roles cast not based on their ethnicity.
Yeah, exactly. That's one of those instances where it's definitely better to err on the side of color conscious, and rather than color blind. You know, we don't want to be taking away um, the stories that those people can be telling, because those people should have a voice, and they shouldn't be constantly suppressed and be plagued by people who haven't gone through those experiences. So that leads us to, this big question I want to ask, like, why is this so important, and why is this such a big deal that we should be more considerate of, especially in schools? You guys are going to be in a place where you can control something like this. So why is it so important to be so conscious of this? Yeah, Jake.
So, I mean, one of the most foundational things that comes to my mind is that like our students that we're going to be working with are going through some of the biggest changes in their lives at that time, both physically, hormonally, mentally, and to see them and to like constantly berate and undermine their existence, and this idea of not using these practices in the correct way to lift them up rather than to keep them down. We're just furthering this idea in their heads that like maybe I'm not good enough because of what I look like, and that's something that we should never be doing, because they're already going through going through life at one of the most like detrimental times of their mentality and their way of being, and finding that identity within themselves. And if they're constantly being pushed down, what does that do to their identity?
Yeah, absolutely. And to go off of that a little bit, like, while you said like they're building up their identity, they're just trying to like figure out who they are. If you are also being told like for me, your only identity is being Mexican, that does a lot of damage to like especially in adolescents' mental health and their perception of who they are, and it kind of puts them into this like one box, and it shouldn't be that. It should, like, high school and middle school and around that time should be a time where you can explore your identity and understand more about yourself rather than just be put into one box. Yeah, Chelsea.
Yeah, going off of that, like our job as the theater educators is to create a safe space. I know at my high school we did, after I graduated, they did a production of Once on This Island with an all-white cast. And all of my friends that were people of color were like, hey, we're really uncomfortable with the fact that they had auditioned and didn't get cast. And I think that my teacher didn't realize what she was doing by not casting those people and by like telling them that their opinions on that didn't matter. I think she like created this space where like theater was a hostile environment for those people. And not only that, but like we're showing these students what theater is like in the future. We're creating this foundation. And so what you show people in high school and what you show these students is like what they're going to imagine theater is forever, like they're going to go to Broadway maybe and like not feel like they have a space because we didn't allow them to have one while they were trying to find one.
Yeah, absolutely. Well put. Skylar.
Yeah, to kind of go off what Chelsea was saying, the thing about theater is that like art in general tells a lot of stories that might not have ever been told. So we have a lot of stories that are talking about race or are talking about like harder hit topics, and not necessarily saying that you should be doing these in high school, but if you did choose to do one of those shows and didn't cast it right, or didn't like take in consideration how meaningful that piece is, you're kind of doing both the play itself and the story like an injustice. So as a theater educator and understanding that theater has a way of telling stories that make people understand more. So if you have the cast to be able to tell a story that have the cast and are of the right ethnicity to direct it or race to direct it, I think it's important to understand or to note this as a teacher, to tell these stories, but in a safe and like actually doing the story justice instead of whitewashing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I also, when you were talking, I noticed a really good point you made, talking about, doing the story an injustice, and I think that's why it's so important to really understand the shows that you're putting on. If you have also the demographic of like a lot of BIPOC students, or let's say a lot of like LGBT students, like you shouldn't just put on a show just because you have that demographic. You should be putting on a show because you want to tell a meaningful story, like you mentioned. The whole purpose of theater is to feel, and the whole purpose of like art is to feel. So what are you doing if you're just putting on a show because you have the tools, you know, like or not the tools, but you have the demographic and you have the people to do it? Yeah, that's great, but why? You know, relating back to this slide. Yeah, Blake.
Yes, hello. I was just going to bring up talking about colorblind casting. Um, I have a friend that goes to another university in Southern Indiana, and they recently did Violet. They did Violet last year, and they casted the show colorblind. But Violet has a lot of race issues in the show that they deal with, and so a lot of I have a friend who is Black, and she was casted as a character, like an ensemble character who should have been white. And so there were lots of characters who were Black that were contributing to like racial stigmas and racism to the Black character, like the Black lead characters in the show. And they had a lot of disassociation and were very upset with their school because it's not a show that can be casted color or colorblind. And so that's like another thing to keep in mind when you are casting, because you can have great intentions of, you know, casting everyone and everything, but you have to make sure that the show is appropriate for that, because it can do just as much damage as good that you want to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. There's a big difference in like, you know, taking risk and creating a show that makes actors and audience members feel unsafe or uncomfortable. You know, it's really good to like, you know, like Hamilton break these barriers and, you know, say like, hey, let's shift this perspective, you know, a little bit to these voices that don't get uplifted a lot. Whereas, you know, if you're taking away that experience, it could be traumatizing for certain actors and audience members as well. So yeah, it's really important to understand that difference and understand when it's appropriate and when it isn't, for sure. Cool. Anybody else before we move on? All right, cool. So really quick, we're gonna move to equity in theater education, which was a good segue from our discussion we just had. And I wanted to start off by dropping this quick quote by Leslie Ishii, who is a California-based stage manager. She is a Black stage manager in California, and she's stage managed a lot of shows there. And she's pretty infamous for being one of like the stage managers. So she mentioned that teachers can break the cycle of oppression by dropping the seeds, holding space, and empowering their students to manifest their experiences. They are showing you what they have absorbed. So does anybody want to talk about how they feel about this quote, what it makes them think? Yeah, Skylar.
Well, this quote, I really like this quote because a lot of the reasons that I went into teaching is because you get the chance to empower so many students and to change their lives. And in the context that we're talking about, as a high school theater teacher or middle school, like what Jake said, that the students are going through so much, that we have the power to kind of empower them at a young age. So our students, our BIPOC students, or like students of color, we have the chance to like actually help them and empower them and make them understand that they are beautiful and they're valuable and they're more than just like their ethnicity or their color. In a sense of like, well, if it's possible, like color conscious casting or color blind casting, like making sure that we're kind of obviously teaching the students what we want them to learn and leading by example. So being kind, not being racist, obviously, like not casting a show wrong or putting any of the students in an uncomfortable position, anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point. Blake?
Yes, I was just going to say that, like, obviously we know that the American education system needs a lot of work, especially because it does a horrible job talking and letting teachers teach about racism and oppression in America. But one of the cool things about theater is that all of our standards are very broad. And so you can cover so many different topics based on what readings and what scripts and what parts of theater that you assign, because those stories can still cover every part of theater that we had to cover with our standards. So that's why I think theater and art especially is just very powerful if the teacher, like this quote is saying, the teacher chooses to do that. So it's our job to include those stories when we're teaching and covering our standards in the future.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Anyone else have anything to add? Let's see the chat really quickly. Was really thinking about how to cover the school prison pipeline with theater standards last night. Yeah, very interesting. It's like how a good teacher can change the course of a kid's life in any way, shape, or form by just caring about the child. Yeah, it's this quote is not asking for a lot. You know, it's really just asking for the basics, and I think it's up to, and what it's mentioning is, I think it's saying that teachers can go the extra mile to make their students feel empowered and make them feel like they actually can have a place to grow rather than, you know, just contain them, rather, for sure. All right, moving on. Let's talk about equity in theater. So like she had mentioned, Leslie, breaking the cycles of oppression. What we need to understand is that traditional ways of doing theater in a curricular and non-curricular setting are no longer effective. You know, these things that we all have accustomed to are no longer something that we should continue doing, because it does more harm than good in the long run, especially for students that are a minority. Um, it's not letting anything to grow, and it's not teaching anyone anything anymore. And going off that, we need to give BIPOC students more of a voice in their own education. So that includes telling stories that need to be told, like we had talked about earlier, and treating students as artists rather than not just students. You know, we don't want to suppress them as much, and by giving minority students more of a voice in their own education, especially when it comes to theater, we're allowing the theater community to grow as a whole, not just in education, but in the whole grand scheme of things, you know, because ultimately these students they can go on to BFA programs, and they can go into Broadway, they can do whatever they want with their own education. But if they see that business through a lens that is so not uplifting and so oppressive, then it's just going to make for an unsafe environment, and it's going to continue to happen time and time again, as we have seen. So I just wanted to list some common phrases to avoid when addressing equity issues, because these are phrases that I have heard myself, and I think this is important for you guys to hear as well as future educators, because you know this isn't something that you guys should be repeating, because this is things that we have heard time and time again. So one of them being, "This is how the industry is." You know, well, I've always had the idea that the industry is only that way because you make it that way. You know, theater is what you make of it. And if we all have this mentality of, oh, well, that's just how it is, you know, it's harsh, and it's silence voices, and it's oppressive, then it's going to be that way. And nothing's ever going to change. Another one being, well, I'm the director and teacher. Well, and that phrase gives such a disconnect between the student and the teacher, or rather the artist and the teacher. You know, you want your students to have more of a voice. And like Chelsea had mentioned, with the students who were seeing, the BIPOC students who were seeing this production of Once on This Island, you know, it makes them feel powerless, and like they don't have a voice, and that they can't speak up for themselves when they do feel uncomfortable. Um, Saying "I meant well" also is very, very toxic, because it doesn't matter what you had meant originally. It only matters your actions. And say that again, that director that Chelsea was talking about said, "Well, I meant well in doing this." It's like, okay, well, you still did the production, and you still made these students feel uncomfortable. And then finally saying, "I've been doing this for blah 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 years." You know, theater is no place to be boasting about your experience, like your ton of experiences, because your experience is different from somebody else's. No one is the same when it comes to their own upbringing, especially in theater. So it should be you should be very you should pay a lot of attention to what these students are saying rather than putting yourself on a pedestal because you guys are both artists and you just happen to be a teacher and they just happen to be a student. So we're going to go into the final discussion on this topic. So these questions that I have up here, what do you hope to see in the next decade for theater education in terms of inclusion? What are you going to do to make this happen? What resources are there that could help teachers create a safer space for BIPOC and LGBTQ students? And any questions you may have. So yeah, let's open up the floor. Yeah, Jake.
In the next decade of theater education, I think, I mean, we're moving, us as feds now, we're moving into this world of the next step for theater within our schools. By the time we get out of here at Ball State, we have a service and duty to our students, especially in one of the most like changing times that we've seen in a while. And I think we would be doing a disservice to our BIPOC students and population if we are placed at a predominantly white school and we continue to enable them to be the oppressors in the system by not checking them and not teaching them the right ways of going about things. You're doing a disservice to our BIPOC students by teaching this idea of, oh, it's okay, you can do, if you teach them, if they want to be directors and you're telling them that it's okay to cast so and so in such role, that enables them to go out into the world and do that. And it continues that system back to back. So we are doing a disservice by not educating our white students as well. And by not exposing them and getting rid of the white theater canon and exposing them to a wide variety of different types of work there are. So there also comes into play in that side that I would love to see turn over in the next 10 years is this idea of not enabling our predominantly white schools to continue to oppress our students.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. And like you had mentioned, going off of that, by not breaking those cycles of oppression and enabling them pretty much, it kind of sets up the theater community as a whole for like a disservice and kind of continues that cycle of oppression within like just theater in general, like Broadway and other like national tours, professional theater, even community theater. It just sets it up as a remaining oppressive system for sure. I think I saw Kaylee's hand raised next.
Yeah, I think it'd be really cool to see new works that are meant for educational settings, because I think oftentimes directors will pick shows that are like, these are gonna sell well, and like these have been shows people know really well, but like take Grease for example, it has like problematic themes in it, and like it's predominantly white most of the time, and there's a whole bunch of other shows like that, and I think there's a lack of shows that have a diverse voices, can be done in a lot of different kinds of high schools, and like they tell news stories. And I think in the next 10 years it'd be really nice to see musicals and plays that are meant for high schools and middle schools that will actually teach students something that isn't a popular story yet, that they may have not been able to see in theater before.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Chelsea, I think I saw your hand raised next.
Yeah. I think like something that I've realized that is something that I need to like be better about devoting myself to is just constantly like seeking out new information and educating myself. We all play a part in this system, like especially as educators, whatever we are putting on our stages or whatever we are promoting, I mean, we're influencing this next generation. And it's just like our work is so much stronger than what I think that we think most of the time. And it's so important that you just like keep educating yourselves. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of the older, especially the older generation, not all, but some believe that once you become a teacher, that's that's it. You have no learning left to do, and you kind of close yourself off between that student teacher relationship, and you can't learn anything else from them. But if you allow yourself to be open minded and allow yourself to, you know, understand more and more about what goes on in terms of that student's education and in terms of that a theater education as well, then ultimately it'll set you up for success. I think I saw Blake next.
Yeah, so I was just going to talk about when we do want to put these stories on stage. I think we also need to keep in mind that sometimes it's not necessarily your story to direct and tell. So getting resources outside of your comfort zone, talking to BIPOC people and LGBTQ plus people to help come in and work on the show with you next to your side and giving advice to you on how to tell these stories and listening to your BIPOC and LGBTQ plus students as well. And, you know, just listening. Listening is very important. And, you know, I think also advocating to administration to tell these stories, because I think a lot of times teachers are too scared to do certain shows because the material isn't school appropriate, when it's really just the administration's racist or homophobic and they don't want to, they're too scared that ticket sales will go down. And it's like, you need to start advocating, because you have so many students, especially in theater, which is a home to all these different types of people. But if you're not going to do your job to advocate and give those students voices, what's the point?
Yes, for sure. And I think that brings up a good point of like, if you aren't going to continue to advocate for your students, and if you're going to say, well, that the administration is just like that, if you're not going to continue to fight to tell these important stories, especially with like new perspectives and things that are really, really valuable lessons to audiences and actors as well, and creative teams, then you're just putting yourself on a shelf and pretty much closing yourself off to any artistic artistic value that you could have on your stage. um I think I saw Montana next.
I just wanted to hop on and agree with Kaylee about new works, because I think it's so important in schools, like especially if you are teaching your students like a playwriting lesson and you do a series of one acts that they have written and that thoroughly share their stories that they want to be heard. I think that's an amazing chance for everybody to tell their own stories and direct their own stories and things like that. So yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, and that brings up a good point about like, what your story is to tell. Your perspective as, let's say a white person would be completely different from a perspective of, a black educator, let's say, or someone who could direct a show that could relate to them more and bring much more of a personal and specific connection to that show. And yeah, I think it's important. I think Jake mentioned using your stipends to bring in guest educators and guest directors, stuff like that. Really, really valuable tool for sure. Montana, are you raising your hand again, or is that no, you're good. Cool. Next, I think we had Michael Boyle.
Another thing I've heard that works really well is if you can bring in like a diversity consultant for a show. I think that goes off of what I forget who said it, but like getting other people's like eyes on what you're projecting is like, hey, is this okay? Is this offensive? Like bringing in members from, like, say if you're doing like a show about the LGBT community, get a diversity consultant from them. Basically just something to help make sure you're telling it in a respectful way, because like respect is key when it comes to these sort of things when you're representing a community you're not a part of.
Yeah, that's a really good idea for sure. Bringing in somebody that can, answer your questions along the way and kind of bring a fresh perspective on things. It's okay to, definitely make mistakes and not understand everything. And so by bringing in someone like that could be a really, really great help. And it can honestly turn your show or your piece of theater into something that's really, really incredible for sure. Next, I think we saw Skylar.
Yeah. So one thing that I think I really would hope to see is like within the next decade and stuff is like obviously if you think back to 2010, well, it would be 2009, I think. So much has changed that I hope that when we are educators, we still like what Chelsea was saying, still continue to educate ourselves because there could be so many more new things or new developments or like things that we have to not try and keep up with, but make sure that we are constantly aware of what's going on. And stuff like that, and also continuing to advocate for our students. And if you are doing or talking about a show that has really heavy topics or something that's dealing a lot with race or with something with an LGBTQ plus like issue, making sure you're in discussion with your students and knowing that if they're ever uncomfortable that they can talk to you, or if they feel like they're not right for this part or something's not right, making sure you're listening. As teachers, I don't remember exactly who said it, but like you don't ever stop having to learn just because you're like the adult in the room, like that you should still learn as much from your students as they're learning from you. So making sure that you're keeping up with like what's going on in the world and also advocating for your students and letting them have it be an open discussion instead of being like, well, I'm the director, so what I say goes, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the key word there is definitely like being a director rather than because in that moment you are a director, not a teacher. Like especially for extracurricular shows and things like that, rather than in the classroom. So the key word there is like director, and you're trying to direct this show into a place that you feel like is incredible and amazing, spectacular, but you cannot direct it all by yourself. You need people along the way, such as your students, such as the creative team, everyone else to help you get there along the way. So if you're just saying, well, I'm going to drive this bus, it's like, okay, well, you don't know where you're going. So definitely something to keep in mind. Yeah, Chelsea.
I sent something in the chat about it, and I'm sure that there are plenty other programs similar to this. But I know Actors Theater of Louisville does like a new voices like premiere thing where they pick like they do residencies at high schools in the area. It's like Kentucky and Indiana, and they come in for free and they like do a bunch of playwriting things. But it's just so cool because not only do their plays get to be performed by like professional actors, but like Actors Theater is great at like diverse casting and all of that. So like it tells their stories not only like beautifully, but also then those students get to be published at a young age, which it's difficult for BIPOC to be published, like period. Which is getting easier, but like it's so much cooler that like they can reach out to these students and then young stories are getting published and getting put out there for people to tell. So just like using those types of resources to tell your students and to show them that their stories and their voices matter.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of that, I'm gonna move to the next slide really quickly, just because I put in some resources. And if you guys want to write down these URLs, I know they're kind of long, but one of them is the American Theater publication that shares stories of diversity and tackling systems of oppression in theater. The other one is a Playbill article on inclusion in theater. And the last one is a list of BIPOC playwrights that was done by Berkeley. And I think it's a huge list, so definitely something to take note of. Jake, you have your hand raised? Oh,
We're also, I wanted to mention to know that everyone here knows I do have these slides, so don't worry about the links. I know Blake just put that in the chat. We'll send it in an email with our notes. That's all I wanted to say. Sorry, Jake, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, good. Something else and I know it's been brought up with Ball State and with Bill, especially here, arming our future teachers with resources that we are not exposed to, pretty specifically within this auditioning for college theater programs. Access to resources is so limited if you are not in a predominantly white upper class community, and allocating those resources and being able to lift up those communities and give them the resources they need, and arming the teachers within them and getting art within the communities without art is something that I would love to see happen in these next few years, whether that's through scholarship programs specifically made for going to Chicago Unifieds or New York Unifieds, but just arming people who don't have the necessary resources to be able to go on and pursue and have this access to art that they're being denied so often.
Hmm. Yeah, more often than not, it's this case where it's like, oh well, I didn't know I didn't know how to audition, I didn't know how to do any of this. I was never exposed to this whole world that we know as, college theater programs and everything like that, and even high school theater. A lot of people who are BIPOC or LGBTQ students and minority don't know how to get involved into these programs because it just feels so closed off, and that it's not for them. And so, like you had mentioned, it's arming your educators with the tools to expose students to this world that we all know, and to this entire it's like an iceberg pretty much, in the bottom of the iceberg, pretty much exposing them to that. Blake said, I also think it is important to cast LGBTQ plus people in LGBTQ plus roles. Yeah, exactly. Um, for sure. I think it's the same deal where it's, you give that perspective um, for this character that you wouldn't get if you were to cast somebody who doesn't relate to anything that this character is going through. It should be much more focused on like, I have the student who's perfect for this role and that actually relates to them. So why not give them a shot and why not cast them in this role? Um, before we, wrap this up, does anyone have anything else that they wanted to share, that they wanted to ask a question about? Anybody? Going once, going twice. Chat. Jake, is that another? Can you explain what that resource is?
Yeah, so it's a new coalition being formed right now. It's BIPOC within Theater for Young Audiences. I know when you take directing for young audiences with Andy in the next few years, he's talked to me about how he's going to integrate more of what this coalition is about into his class. But essentially, on this website, you can take a pledge and it's basically about becoming a better theater educator or better director within theater young audiences that deals with BIPOC issues and BIPOC individuals. Once you take the pledge, and if you want to become an actual member, there's like a fee, but that money goes to help benefit BIPOC youth. You get unlimited amounts of resources to be able to use within your shows, within your directing program, that kind of stuff. So give a look at that and take the pledge if you want to, which you should.
Amazing. Yeah, that sounds great. Chelsea, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, I think we've talked a lot about like what we can do like in the future. But I know sometimes that feels a little too far off. And I know we've kind of talked about some like things that you could do now, but I'm kind of curious what if you could like tell us like just say some things that you think we should like start working on now, or like some things that we should like some action that we can take while we're in college, while we're students in college.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one good thing that I've always had in mind is that, you know, more people of color, more BIPOC and LGBTQ plus students should at least here at Ball State, we have the student production committee. By joining that and advocating for shows that, wouldn't be put on, that you wouldn't see a lot, written by BIPOC playwrights or LGBTQ plus playwrights that deal with these stories that are really, really impactful for those specific groups, can definitely go a long way, and just by advocating to these, committees that determine shows and everything. So that's one thing. Second thing is to just also be, not only taking in the information that your professors are giving you right now, because at some points it is very one-sided. It is, here's one show that we're going to focus on by this old dead white guy, and that's it. And sometimes there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes you learn valuable lessons through that, but other times, that's all that you focus on. And I think it's really important to not only get in the information that you are receiving, but also seek out information that can be helpful to you in the future. Especially also like the history of theater, understanding where these cycles of oppression stemmed from. Theater started off as minstrel shows, which was ultimately very, very racist, and understanding those oppressive roots and understanding how this whole thing came together, and seeing how you can switch gears and ultimately take that into another direction can go a long way. And finally, what Jake had mentioned too was really interesting. By not enabling not only just predominantly white schools to continue traditional practices, but understanding when to call out oppressive behaviors in the moment right now. If somebody is, at least in the university setting, being oppressive or not giving a voice to certain students, calling it out goes a long way. And using your voice, because you do have a voice as a student, if you believe it or not, like you do have a voice, and you do have the opportunity to reach out to professors and tell them how you feel and what you think should change. So I think those are 3 ways that you can definitely make a change for right now. Anybody else before we depart from this? Anybody? Cool. Well, I'm gonna stop sharing the screen then. Come back to the main thing. Jake said, read, and research as many plays as you can, and diversify your personal library of theatrical work. Very true. Yeah, like I mentioned, you don't want to be doing only story. You don't want to only be exposed to only stories about that were written or about dead white dudes. You want to expand your knowledge for sure, because there's so much out there, and there is so much good and valuable work that is out there. So seek out that as much as you can. Anyone else before head out?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Evan, for that. We want to give him a round of applause. That was really informative. We really appreciate it as the theater education, as the future educators. If any of you have any questions for him at a later point, or you randomly think of a question, and you're like, oh, this would be a great thing to ask. Evan, if you want to put your email in the chat or somebody to get a hold of you. If not, you can email us and we can get, oh, perfect. So you could email him if you'd like, and have any more questions. The recording will be on the YouTube, right? Yes, and sent out, we'll let you know where it is, as long with the slides as well. So don't worry about those links. We'll put those in an email. Thank you all so much for coming.